He lost his temper and touched the queen's tail. No one expected her response. Marcus Rivera had always believed that engineering problems had logical solutions. Heat exchangers, quantum drives, gravitational compensators, all followed predictable patterns. But as he stood in the blood-soaked sand of the Kelthoran combat arena, watching his opponents for muscular arms flex in preparation for the killing blow, realized that survival operated by entirely different rules. The crowd of scaled spectators hissed their disapproval as Marcus stumbled backward, his ribs screaming from the gash that painted his shirt crimson. 3 months of fighting in this hellish pit had taught him that honor meant nothing when you were dead. The Kelthoran warrior before him, a brute called Vex with hide like granite, had killed 17 opponents. Marcus had survived this long, not through strength, but through cunning, that these proud aliens viewed as cowardice. Above the arena, on a throne carved from obsidian and bone, sat Queen Lirelei. Even from this distance, Marcus could see her predatory grace-emerald skin marked with silver patterns that seemed to shift in the harsh light. Its cascading black hair that framed sharp aristocratic features, and eyes like molten gold that missed nothing. Her most striking feature was her tail, thick, powerful, and armored with natural plates that caught the light like polished metal. It was said to be both weapon and symbol of her authority. Vex charged with a roar that shook the arena walls. Marcus had one chance. As the warrior's 4 fists descended, Marcus threw himself sideways, not away from danger, but toward it. His hand shot out, fingers closing around the ceremonial chain that hung from Vex's belt, a symbol of his clan's honor. With a desperate twist, Marcus used the warrior's own momentum to send him crashing into the arena wall. The crowd fell silent. By Kelthoran law, touching an opponent's honor chain was the deepest insult possible. Vex lay unconscious, but Marcus had won through what they considered the most dishonorable method imaginable. Queen Lirelei's golden eyes fixed on him with an expression he couldn't read. With a subtle gesture, she signaled the guards. Marcus found himself dragged from the arena not to execution, but to the slave quarters where his only remaining crewmate waited. Jamie, Marcus gasped, collapsing onto the stone bench beside the younger man. Jamie Oakes had been a navigation officer aboard their lost ship, the Meridian. Now he was the only other human survivor of their crash landing on this warrior world. "You won again," Jamie whispered, his voice hollow with fear. "They're calling you the trickster. They say you fight without honor." Marcus pressed a torn cloth to his wound, tasting copper and sand. "Honor's a luxury for people who have choices, kid. We're just trying to see tomorrow." Through the bars of their cell, Marcus could see the royal spire where Queen Lirelei held court. He didn't know it yet, but his unconventional victory had caught more than just her attention. It had triggered something in the ancient genetic memory of her people, something that would change both their destinies forever. The summons came. At dawn, heavy guards escorted Marcus through corridors of polished stone to a chamber he'd never seen. Queen Lirelei's private war room. Maps covered the walls, showing the approaching threat that had every Kelthoran warrior sharpening their blades. The Devours, a machine intelligence that had already consumed 3 systems. Lirelei stood with her back to him, studying a tactical display. Without her ceremonial armor, wearing only a simple tunic of midnight blue, she somehow seemed more dangerous, not less. Her tail moved with subtle grace, its armored tip tapping against the floor in what Marcus was learning to recognize as a sign of deep thought. "Your methods disgust my warriors," she said, without turning around. "They call you a coward, a creature, without honor." She finally faced him, her golden eyes intense. "Yet you continue to win." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I fight to survive, Your Majesty. Honor is a beautiful concept, but it doesn't stop bleeding." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Pragmatic. Tell me, human, what do you see when you look at our enemy?" She activated the display, showing the Devourer fleet geometric nightmares of black metal and pulsing energy. Marcus studied the formations, his engineer's mind automatically analyzing patterns and weaknesses. "I see machines that think in straight lines," he said finally. "They're efficient, logical, but they lack imagination." They'll expect you to meet them in glorious battle, shield to shield, honor against overwhelming numbers. And you would do differently. I'd make them come to me on ground of my choosing. Use the planet itself as a weapon. Turn their efficiency against them. Marcus traced possible defensive positions on the map. Your people are warriors, but they're also builders, crafters. They could create traps that would make the Devourer's logic work against them. Lyralei's tail stopped moving. She stepped closer, and Marcus caught her sense something wild and electric, like ozone before a storm. You speak of tactics no Keltheran would consider, because I'm not Keltheran. Sometimes an outside perspective, she moved with liquid grace, faster than his human reflexes could follow. One moment he was speaking, the next her hand was pressed against his chest, claws just touching his skin through the fabric.
Of her golden.
Eyes were wide with something that looked almost like shock. You would have me abandon everything we are, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I'd have you survive, Marcus replied quietly. What good are traditions to the dead? For a heartbeat they stood frozen like that predator and prey, queen and slave. Two different species on the brink of something neither fully understood. Then Lyralei stepped back, her composure returning like armor. The council meets at sunset, she said. You will attend your ... perspective. May prove useful. As the guards escorted him away, Marcus didn't see the way her tail curled unconsciously, or the troubled look in her golden eyes. The ancient laws of her people were stirring, responding to something in this strange human that defied all logic and tradition. Asterisk, the war council erupted in chaos. Keltheran clan leaders, their scales ranging from bronze to deep emerald, slammed fists on the stone table as Marcus outlined his defensive strategy. To them, hiding in prepared positions was cowardice. Honor demanded they meet the Devourers. In open battle, you ask us to cower like prey animals, roared Thane Corax, his crimson scales flushed darker with rage. We are warriors, not tunnel rats. Marcus stood his ground, though he could feel the weight of their hatred like a physical force. Your warriors are brave, but bravery without strategy is just elaborate suicide. Enough. Corax surged to his feet, his massive frame towering over the human. I will not hear battle wisdom from a slave who wins through trickery. The chamber fell silent. Akalion! By Keltheran law, no one could speak in the queen's presence without permission. Corax had committed a grave breach of protocol. But Marcus saw something else in the Thane's Isa challenge that went beyond mere disagreement. Queen. Lyralei rose from her throne, her tail lashing once in warning. Thane Corax, you forget yourself. I forget nothing, my queen. Corax's voice carried a dangerous edge. I see only that our sacred traditions are being poisoned by alien ideas. Perhaps it is time for new leadership. Leadership that remembers. What it means to be Keltheran, the threat was unmistakable. Formal challenge to the throne. Marcus felt the tension in the room shift, saw loyal warriors calculating their allegiances. This was a coup, and he had triggered it with his unconventional strategies. Lyralei's response was swift and deadly. She moved like flowing water, her tail snapping out to trip Corax while her claws found the soft spot beneath his jaw. But the Thane was ready, caught her wrist, his other hand closing around her throat. Marcus acted on pure instinct. Everything he'd learned about Keltheran anatomy in 3 months of fighting flashed through his mind. He lunged forward, not at Corax's massive frame, but at the most vulnerable target he could reach, the base of Queen Lyralei's tail. His human hands closed around the armored appendage just above where it joined her spine. The reaction was instantaneous and shocking. Lyralei's entire body went rigid, a sound somewhere between gasp and growl escaping her lips. Corax released her immediately, stumbling backward with an expression of absolute horror. The silence that followed was deafening. Every warrior in the chamber had frozen, their faces showing the same mixture of disbelief and primal recognition. Marcus felt the queen's tail trembling in his grip, felt her powerful body swaying as if she might collapse. Impossible, someone whispered. Marcus looked up into Lyralei's golden eyes and saw his own confusion reflected there. Mixed with something else, something that made his heart race, despite the mortal danger they were all in. Her pupils had dilated, and her breathing had become shallow and rapid. The primal law, Korax breathed, backing away as if from a plague victim. By the ancestors, the human has triggered the primal law. The ancient texts spoke of it only in whispers, a genetic imperative so old that most Kelthorans believed it was myth. It's the primal law. When a warrior could grasp the queen's tail and survive her first instinct to kill, biology itself recognized them as her destined mate and protector. Marcus still didn't understand what had happened as the guards escorted him to luxurious chambers instead of a cell. Lirelei had collapsed after he touched her tail, her body racked with shudders that seemed to come from her very core. The assembled thanes had prostrated themselves, their planned coup forgotten in the face of an event that hadn't occurred in over 1,000 years. Now he sat in rooms that belonged more to a palace than a prison, tending wounds that servants had carefully cleaned and dressed. The door chimed, and Lirelei entered. No longer wearing her ceremonial robes, but a simple dress that somehow made her more beautiful, more real. "You don't understand what you've done," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. She moved to the window, her tail, that powerful, terrible appendage, now held carefully still. "Then explain it to me," Marcus replied. "Your people keep talking about laws and biology, but nobody's telling me what any of it means." She turned to face him, and he saw vulnerability in her golden eyes for the first time. "Among my people, the tail is more than a weapon. It's the seat of our strength, our authority, our very identity. For someone to grasp it and live," she paused, struggling with words. "My body recognizes you as my superior, as my mate." Marcus felt his world tilt. That's insane." I grabbed. "You too stop a fight. I didn't even know. It doesn't matter what you intended." Lirelei's voice carried a note of bitter irony. "Biology doesn't care about intention. Every instinct I have now tells me to protect you, to defer to you, to—" She trailed off color, rising in her emerald cheeks. "To what?" "To bind myself to you completely." She met his eyes. "The primal law isn't just about recognition. It's about reproduction, about ensuring the strongest genes survive. Till the bond is consummated, I am ... compromised. Incomplete." Marcus stood slowly, understanding flooding through him. That's why Korax backed down. Why the other thanes submitted. "They think I'm your husband now." "You're my husband now," she corrected. "Whether either of us wanted it or not." The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He was no longer just a surviving engineer trying to stay alive. Was the queen's consort bound to her by alien biology and ancient law? "What if we dawn, double quotes," he began. "Then I remain weakened, and our people die when the devourers come." Her voice was steady, but her tail betrayed her, curling and uncurling with nervous energy. "The choice is yours, Marcus Rivera. Accept what fate has made you, or watch a civilization fall." Part 5. The King and Queen, 500 words, the consummation of the primal law was not the passionate encounter Marcus might have imagined in his youth. Instead, it was a quiet, profound ceremony in Lirelei's private chambers, with the weight of two-species survival hanging over them. When their hands touched and her tail wrapped gently around his wrist, the connection that formed was deeper than mere physical attraction. It was the meeting of two minds that had found unexpected harmony in the days that followed. Worked with Kelthoran engineers to implement his defensive strategies, he began to understand the true nature of their bond. He could sense Lirelei's presence even when she was in distant parts of the palace. Her tactical instincts complemented his strategic thinking, creating a partnership that neither had expected. The Devourer fleet arrived like a plague of metal locusts, blotting out the stars with their geometric hulls. But instead of finding a world of warriors charging headlong into glorious death, they encountered something their logical minds couldn't process: empty cities and silent battlefields. Marcus watched from the command center deep beneath the capital, his hand resting on Lirelei's shoulder as she coordinated the defense. Her tail had become a familiar comfort, often curling around his arm during their long strategy sessions. The bond between them had evolved from biological imperative to genuine partnership, and now to something that felt remarkably like love. Phase 1 is complete, reported Commander Zeth, one of the few Thanes who had embraced Marcus's unconventional tactics. The Devourers are landing in the prepared zones. On the tactical display, thousands of enemy units descended into what appeared to be defenseless valleys and plains. They had no way of knowing that every landing site had been carefully chosen and prepared. As the first wave touched down, Marcus squeezed Liralay's hand. "Now," he said quietly. She gave the signal. Across the planet, hidden charges detonated simultaneously. Entire mountainsides collapsed, burying landing zones under millions of tons of rock. Dammed rivers burst their barriers, flooding valleys with torrents that short-circuited the machine's systems. Geothermal vents, carefully overloaded, turned landing sites into furnaces that melted even the Devourer's advanced alloys. The surviving machines, confused by tactics that defied all military logic, began to adapt. But Marcus had anticipated this. Phase 2 began as Kelthran warriors emerged from concealed positions, not in glorious charges, but in carefully coordinated strikes that targeted specific weak points he had identified. They fought like hunters now rather than heroes, and the Devourers died by the thousands. In the end, it was Liralay herself who delivered the killing blow. Using the quantum resonance frequency Marcus had discovered in the enemy's communication network, she broadcast a signal that turned their own coordination system against them. The remaining Devourers simply stopped, their machine minds overwhelmed by paradoxical commands. Victory came not with the clash of armies, but with sudden, beautiful silence. Years later, as Marcus stood on the balcony of their shared chambers, watching their children play in the gardens below, he reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. Jamie, now his chief of staff, is teaching the youngsters human games while Keltheron Noble's children learned alongside them. The rigid caste system was slowly giving way to something more flexible, more inclusive. Liralay emerged from their bedroom, her hair still tousled from sleep, her tail seeking his hand in the unconscious gesture that had become their most intimate. Greeting, their eldest daughter remarkable. Hybrid with her mother's golden eyes, and her father's engineering mind waved up at them from the garden. "Any regrets?" Liralay asked, leaning against him as they watched their impossible family. Marcus smiled, his fingers tracing the armored plates of her tail that had once been a weapon and was now simply part of the woman he loved. "It took me so long to realize that sometimes the best solutions are the ones you never see coming." Below them, the city hummed with the activity of two species learning to build something new together up. Future neither could have imagined alone, but both had found the courage to create.